I love the Fall Guys concept in every way, from its goofy game show aesthetic to the fact that it's got Yukio Kallio of all people doing the music, to its deceptively complicated levels that feel easy to pick up but genuinely challenging to master, to yes, the fact that it is extremely easy to pick up and put down exactly when I want to play it. I love this game despite the fact that I am exceptionally, incredibly, spectacularly terrible at it. Just like the battle royales it's based on, it's chaotic and simple enough that pretty much anyone picking up a controller has at least a chance to come out on top. But there's just enough depth to make it feel like the dedicated will be rewarded with more consistent results. And to be honest, I haven't given this game as much time as it deserves. Fall Guys has been out for 2 years now, and it spent most of that time as just a fond memory. A pretty cool and unique game that I had fun messing with for 10 hours before getting busy and moving on with my life. But I regret spending all that time away, because I randomly picked it up again on a whim a few weeks ago, and in those 2 years, this game has completely transformed. If you haven't checked out Fall Guys lately, you owe it to yourself to go give it another look, because this game is absolutely insane now. In almost every conceivable way, Fall Guys is a better game than 2 years ago. It's not even a contest. That it benefited from having 2 years to almost triple its map count and establish some much needed variety is a given, but it goes so far beyond that. With the advent of squads mode, the game's gotten far friendlier to jump into with a few friends, no longer forcing you to watch them play for a dozen minutes if you get knocked out early, and the fact that it's free to play now doesn't hurt. But more than anything, Fall Guys has truly ramped up the quality of every minigame it's introduced since launch. Even though the game's initial selection of like 20 maps were already pretty fun, the new ones that have come since blow them out of the water. Fan favorite maps have been iterated into bigger, newer, and more impressive configurations, while some of the game's biggest duds have been rehabilitated and had their rough edges shaved away. Fall Guys' new maps have grown denser, more sophisticated, and more focused on what makes the game so great. Almost every single map release post-launch has some form of callback to an idea found in the original lineup, but they all evolve, combine, or remix those ideas into something new and even tighter than what they'd started with. And while that's all happening, they've slowly developed an ever-widening language of new obstacles to add to their growing toolbox with every major patch. More than almost any other game I've seen, Fall Guys is using the long tail of its games-as-service model to learn from past launches, iterate and riff on long-running ideas, and build something that is head and shoulders above where it started. Some of these iterations are incredibly simple. Hey, what if we took all the assets we already have from Rollout and just made a different game mode with all those same pieces? What if we just did Hexagon again, but we used a new mechanic we introduced this patch? What if we did Slime Climb, but like, more and bigger? Maps like the Slime Scraper are perhaps one of the simplest yet best ways in which Fall Guys has improved on itself. Races, which work exactly how they sound, have kind of become the centerpiece game mode for Fall Guys, and if you look at the races that were out at launch, they were as basic as was physically possible. Every race was a literal straight line with several rooms of obstacles that you had to march through. Slime Climb, which had you outrunning a rising pool of game-ending slime up a zigzagging path, was the only exception to this, and I don't think it's a coincidence that it became one of the standout levels at launch. But Fall Guys has only gotten more elaborate from there. Whether it's a circuit, a zigzagging S-shape, or something more complicated like having a moving platform go through an obstacle course forcing you to keep up, the actual race paths themselves have gotten more involved and interesting. Even the races that are still relatively linear have multiple paths through most of their challenges, with higher risk shortcuts on perilous upper floors, but the easier but slower path underneath to catch you when you screw up. It's another idea borrowed from a few launch maps that worked out so well that it just comes standard with most linear race maps now, and it's largely improved the feel of the game. Anytime Fall Guys has decided to play with verticality, it's always been to the game's benefit. So it's no surprise that a map like Freezy Peak is a particular standout, giving a whole dang diggity mountain for you to climb. It starts with players all fanned out around the mountain's base, then they all converge at the midpoint and tackle the second half in a slowly tightening spiral. This level's just got the works. Aesthetically, it's a slam dunk. The route going up and around the mountain is far more interesting than the old linear layouts. The way groups start a little more spread out before they converge is a welcome little gameplay wrinkle when compared to other races when you're just stuck in the middle of 50 other bodies unable to move, and depending on where you spawn, you even have to deal with completely different obstacles at the start. That last detail, the asymmetric obstacles, is one of my favorite touches in Freezy Peak, but the same idea is taken way further in Pipe Dream, an absolutely wild map that I've only had the pleasure of playing like once in the 20 hours I've been playing the game this month. But it definitely left an impression. Pipe Dream is a sort of choose-your-own-adventure minigame, with several branching paths that all lead to entirely unique challenges connected by the map's signature tubes. Once again, there is just a lot happening on this map. It's no harder than any of the minigames that came before it, but the sheer level of variety of what's on display, as well as the way you can strategically pick out how you navigate through the level, gives you way more to interact with and think about than many starting maps. I love the asymmetrical nature of this level, and being able to try and figure out which tube leads where makes it a lot more interesting to navigate than many early maps. A lot like Freezy Peaks, this isn't just a more involved minigame to play through, but also a more involved game to craft from the developer's side, with far more unique challenges in the same level, presented in a unique fashion. And it shows just how much Fall Guys has grown and come into its own in the 2 years since it first released, that it's just busting out these maps with every patch. But if you really want to see a direct comparison on how far Fall Guys has come and how much more ambitious it's gotten in scope, you can find an even easier one in something like Skyline Stumble. This map is as simple as it gets, a race in the exact same extremely linear design as Fall Guys' earliest minigames. It's just a simple succession of several rooms, but despite having the exact same basic structure, it is so much more involved. If you look at a lot of the early maps in Fall Guys, there's exactly one idea going on in each of them. Dizzy Heights is all about these turntables, Seesaw is literally just a line of the eponymous seesaws, and Gate Crash is a hallway with a bunch of doors that periodically pop up and down to block you. Skyline Stumble is designed exactly like these other maps, but it's also a sort of taste tester of almost every single new obstacle or idea that appeared in its specific update. You have a gauntlet of 6 separate rooms, all with entirely different obstacles to contend with, be they disappearing laser bridges, low gravity fields, or a big room full of laser doors that turn on and off again when players hit different buttons, all topped off with this mountainous pinball machine. And we're working with a lot of ideas here that I've already lauded. We've got multiple different ways that this minigame plays with verticality, we've got a high variety of different challenges, and we have old ideas being repurposed in new and interesting ways. The laser door room is conceptually very similar to the launch minigame Gate Crash, but it gets that additional wrinkle where players can sabotage each other by jumping on buttons to make different doors pop up or down, giving the game a little more room for interaction than what Gate Crash has. And while Gate Crash draws its solitary idea out into an entire minigame, it's repurposed here as a single room you run through in 20 seconds flat, just in the middle of a whole bunch of other nonsense you have to deal with. But okay, it's not just about quantity. Fall Guys has gotten bigger and more expansive than ever, but it can still take older, smaller elements and create something wildly new and different. The same update that gave us Freezy Peak also introduced Ski Fall, a very brief hill you slide down repeatedly trying to jump through various hoops to score points with a big set of skee ball rings at the end. When you break it all down, the idea is basically just, hey, what if we did our usual obstacle course shtick, but every time you finished it, you respawned and went through it again. But it still creates one of the most unique and interesting minigames in the entire lineup. Ski Fall is also one of the more modular levels in Fall Guys. One of the tricks this game pulled early on to try and inject the game with a little more variety was changing around what obstacles appeared on already existing maps, with multiple permutations all potentially showing up at any time. If you remember the advent of the Big Yeetus when that was a big meme for like 2 weeks, that's what all that was about. And the game's only added more and more different versions of old maps that can be swapped in and out at will. And I'll be honest, this was a little too underwhelming in many of the game's initial maps, which are mostly just too wide open to matter much if a giant hammer got slapped on top of them. But something smaller and much more focused like Ski Fall thrives with this sort of modularity, with each section getting its own complications that completely change the feel of the map. Sometimes there's a bunch of ice over the skee ball exit at the end, making it incredibly easy to score. And sometimes there is a giant fan that is the bane of my goddamn existence and stuffs me every single time I come across it. But alright, it's easy to make an already good thing even better, and races were already pretty much the best part about Fall Guys. What has this game done with some of their worst minigames? The absolute duds that I dread coming up in the queue. Most games in this situation would just ditch them completely. Like, at this point, you've got 60 maps, 55 of them are absolute bangers. It's the easiest decision in the world to just retire the 5 that blow and pretend they never happened. Right? Astonishingly, the developers over at Mediatonic chose the significantly harder path to try and rehabilitate the ideas presented in these modes. And perhaps even more miraculously, they actually managed to pull it off. One of my least favorite maps in the entire game is Hoopsie Daisy, a team game that challenges 3 different groups with jumping through as many randomly spawning rings as possible. However, the issue is kind of the random part. There's not a whole lot to Hoopsie Daisy beyond simple luck. At most, you can strategically spread your team out as evenly as possible across the arena, but after that, you're mostly praying that a ring spawns literally right next to you, because if it spawns anywhere else, then it's going to spawn right next to one of the other 20 people running around the arena, and they'll get it before you can even pull a U-turn. There's just not that much you can do to affect the actual result of the game. But literally just a month ago, Fall Guys' latest patch included the minigame Bounce Party. Now, this isn't a team game, it's every person for themselves, but it's the exact same basic concept. Jump through rings, get points, do it faster than everybody else. It's built around these cool and somewhat unpredictable bounce paths that were introduced in the patch, but there are 2 other changes that I'm far more interested in. One, unlike in Hoopsie Daisy, multiple people can score jumping through the same ring. And 2, the rings all spawn on one side of the arena, then slowly drift across over the bounce pads, giving everyone time to properly respond to the changing flow of the match. These 3 tweaks to Hoopsie Daisy's core concept created an entirely new, radically different minigame that is far stronger, one that is largely contingent on advanced planning and skill over luck. The bounce pads make scoring a little more complicated compared to the rings you could practically just walk through in Hoopsie Daisy, so there's a bit more of a skill element to the game, and the small tweaks to how rings spawn and how people can interact with them make the game mode feel significantly more fair. It's not the only example, either. One of the most groan-worthy games from launch was Perfect Match, a pretty simple memory game. The level would start by flashing different fruits on different floor tiles, then stopped and showed one fruit in particular on a TV up front. Go stand on the tile to match the fruit, and you were good. This one was just a little too effortless. It was pretty easy to keep track of where to go, and even if you somehow missed the answer, you could just cheat on the test by jumping on the same tile the other 30 people were jumping on. It was an extremely rare occurrence that anyone actually ever got eliminated in Perfect Match, and the game itself wasn't exactly riveting either. But then they took a second crack at it with Some Fruit, another memory game with the same basic conceit, but with a few tweaks to ensure that it didn't fall into the same pit traps. They basically built an entire room around the original Perfect Match arena, and now in order to get up to the safe tiles, you have to scale a series of stairs. It's nothing terribly difficult, but it works as a distraction to keep you from being able to focus too closely on the fruit, which, by now, you've noticed is also being displayed in a different fashion. Instead of all popping up right next to each other on floor tiles, giant fruit falls from the sky and you have to look around the room to count it all. You can't see all the fruit at once, and sometimes a piece can be hiding behind an obstacle or move around the room and accidentally get counted twice, and that extra layer of obfuscation is just enough to make that original concept in Perfect Match a little more engaging and complicated. Some Fruit still isn't my favorite game, but it's a significant step up, and I don't mind when it decides to suddenly appear. So alright, we've covered a lot of ground here and talked about individual lessons that some of these different maps can give us, but what does this all look like when we put all of these different design lessons together? Let's take a look at Lost Temple, which is essentially 2 base games, DoorDash and Tiptoe, mashed into one. DoorDash is a pretty simple concept. There is a long corridor filled with doors. Some of these doors are solid walls, and some will open when you bash your face into them. Guess right enough times to make it to the end. Tiptoe is similarly straightforward and based on uncertain information. You're on a grid of tiles, some of these tiles are real, and some you'll just fall through when you walk on them. Guess right enough times to make it to the end. In both of these games, you don't really want to be the one in front risking it all to figure out where the real door or floor is, but you also don't want to bring up the rear for obvious reasons, and so the real game at play is one of carefully positioning yourself in the pecking order to take advantage of when someone else finds the right solution, while avoiding a situation where you have to be the one guessing. You never want to be first, but you always want to be second or third. DoorDash is a fun idea, but the entire map is just a hallway with rows after rows of doors, and Tiptoe is literally a grid of tiles hovering in the void without any aesthetic garnish or real mechanical crunch. Both of these maps have exactly one idea going on in them, presented in the most bare-bones way imaginable, but what would happen if you smash them together? Fast forward almost a year later, and you get Lost Temple, taking the exact same basic rhythm of both of these games and combining their structures to create something with far more depth. Lost Temple uses DoorDash's whole concept with the breakable doors verbatim, but combines it with Tiptoe's grid template to create a massive rat maze that's more mechanically interesting and visually engaging. With this more complicated layout, there are times where you can logic together that the real path has to go one direction or another, and just as a bonus, every room you run into has its own little mini obstacle you have to conquer. That gives you far more to engage with in the moment-to-moment going through the maze, allows for more opportunities for skilled play to make a difference in the end result, and because the path through the temple is randomized, every game is going to see you encountering different obstacles, just like in Pipe Dream. Lost Temple is part of a growing pack of minigames that I feel symbolize everything that Fall Guys is doing right, alongside Freezy Peak, Pipe Dream, and Bounce Party. This game has spent 2 years doing something actually incredibly difficult. It has developed more complex and ambitious levels that expand on previous ideas or mash simpler elements together to make something more complicated that creates additional space to make informed decisions and execute strategic play, all of which translates to more entertaining minigames. Every individual map gets so much more work and love from the developers that I'm frankly astonished they can keep up the release schedule they do. And perhaps the tallest order of all, it's achieved this growing complexity and ambition without the game getting any harder from a mechanical execution standpoint. With the exception of 1 or 2 minigames, Fall Guys is still an immediately approachable game, one that raises the skill ceiling enough that you can get some satisfaction from learning and mastering each minigame's individual quirks, while keeping the skill floor at a level where the game can still be picked up by anyone who just wants to blow off some steam for an hour. And that's not easy. And the folks over at Mediatonic have been knocking it out of the park and making it look effortless while they do it. Fall Guys is a unicorn of a game. It is one of the best multiplayer games you could be playing with your friends. It is one of the easiest popular games on the market to pick up and start enjoying immediately, and as of recently, free to play to boot. And if you come here specifically for my recommendations of games that will provide you with a quality experience in a short span of time, that won't waste the time or effort you put into it, and is fun from the very first moment you pick it up, it is one of the best games you could be playing right now. So if that all sounded exciting, I hope you give Fall Guys a try, or like me, a second look. And if you enjoyed this somewhat deeper dive into a game and like the work I do, consider hitting up my Patreon, because I too need to eat and would very much appreciate the tip. But I hope you guys enjoyed this sort of quasi-review/video essay thing about Fall Guys, and I'll see you all next time.